Well, Mike, John, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured that you've asked me again to speak at this fantastic gathering, and what a great collection you bring together of the business community of Britain and our body politic with representatives from all the political parties here. And I remember vividly the first time I addressed this audience as Chancellor. It was literally days after taking office. It was in the midst of an emerging European sovereign debt crisis with great uncertainty about the stability of the new coalition government born out of a hung parliament, and great anxiety about the economic prospects for our country. There was a real doubt that Britain could tackle its debt problem or create jobs for the many left unemployed by the Great Recession that we had endured. And pervading everything was a palpable pessimism about Britain's future as a front-rank power in the global economy, as multinationals were moving out to headquarter abroad and punitive tax rates threatened an exodus of wealth creators. And it has taken time and effort and belief and sacrifice to bring our country back from the brink to the real sense of optimism that is growing in Britain today. It has not been a smooth progress, as our principal export markets almost collapsed and oil prices rose. But we held our nerve, and this is my opportunity to thank you for helping us work through our long-term economic plan, the support of the CBI and British business for our determination to bear down on the destabilizing budget deficit never wavered, even while the chorus of criticism grew. For you understood that this had to be a recovery led by the private sector. But it would be a grave mistake to think that our job is done or think we can go easy and slow down. Tell the 2.2 million people who are still unemployed that the job is done. And they will say, not while we are without work, it isn't. The job is not done until we have achieved the ambition we've set of full employment with further welfare reform, further investment in infrastructure, and yes, further reductions in business taxation. Tell the hard-pressed taxpayer that the job is done. And they will say, not while our deficit remains too high, while our debts are still rising, for we will pick up the pieces if you back down and spend more. And the job is not done until the deficit is eliminated, the debt is falling, and Britain is running a prudent surplus. And that is what our future spending plans deliver. Tell the small or indeed medium-sized business looking to export that the job is done. And they will say, not while our competitors in other countries get more support. The job is not done until Britain exports much more. So we're doubling our export finance, cutting its cost to the businesses, and opening new trade and investment offices in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Tell the British manufacturers hit by high energy costs that the job is done. And they will say, not while I'm being outcompeted by my European, let alone American counterparts, not while I'm worried the lights might go out in the future. And the job is not done until we have competitive energy prices, which is why we cut energy taxes in the budget, why we're backing shale gas, and building the first civil nuclear power station in a generation, so that there is no fear of the lights ever failing us. And tell the young family who dream of owning their own home that the job is done. And they will say, not while we can't afford a home, even though we have a steady income. The job is not done for as long as demand for housing so hugely exceeds supply in this country, and people struggle to get on the housing ladder, which is why we have reformed our planning laws, provided new finance for the construction sector, and given the Bank of England new powers and responsibilities to spot emerging risks and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Our task to secure our country's economic future is not even half done. This is a decade-long turnaround job we have embarked upon, and we're determined to see it through. For there are risks abroad to our prosperity, from the situation in the Ukraine to the persistent weak growth in the Eurozone. And there are risks at home too, which we must confront together, like the economic risks of Scotland leaving the United Kingdom that Mike Rake is rightly warning us about this evening. But tonight, I want to address 3 long-term risks to our national prosperity. And let me take each in turn. The first risk to our long-term national prosperity comes from our relationship with an unreformed Europe. Now, you, the CBI, point out the risks of Britain leaving the EU and say we must remain in. And it's true that those who want Britain to leave the EU now, instead of working to reform it, are taking a risk with our economy. But those who advocate membership of this union without reform, whatever the direction it heads in, and regardless of the costs it imposes on our businesses, are also taking a risk with our economy. On its current course, the EU is pricing our continent out of the global economy. As Angela Merkel has said, Europe accounts for just over 7% of the world's population, 25% of its economy, and 50% of global social welfare spending. EU regulations are estimated to cost the UK alone up to £27 billion a year. EU financial services legislation has given Britain access to new markets, yes, but we now face the threat of an anti-business agenda in the European Parliament being imposed on Britain, even when we object, and threatening the city's position as the world's leading financial centre. Britain must not be supine in the face of these dangers. We are determined to lead the demand for change, real change in Europe. And just as we have a plan to turn around our economy, which we are delivering, so too we have a plan to change the European Union, and we will deliver on that too. A plan not just to complete the single market in areas like energy and digital services, not just to conclude free trade deals with the United States, Japan, and China, but to reverse the direction of centralizing power and loading ever higher costs on the European economy. For that direction is destroying jobs, killing innovation, and with it, calling into question the legitimacy of the Union itself. And the British business community recognizes this. Indeed, in my experience, there are no more vocal critics of the current EU than many of our businesses who are on the receiving end of much of the cost of this unreformed Europe. And anyone who cares about our long-term economic prosperity should get behind our plan to seek fundamental reform of the EU and of Britain's relationship with the EU, so that we have a European arrangement which can create jobs, not destroy them, reduce energy bills, not increase them, and support competitive financial services, not undermine them. And where Britain's rights and interests as a member state, not in the euro, but the second largest European economy and the second largest contributor to European expenditure, are fully respected and entrenched. And for those who say that a referendum creates uncertainty, I say a referendum is the only way to resolve the uncertainty that already hangs over Britain's relationship with Europe. So my message is simple: work with us to seize the moment to force the pace on real economic reform in Europe. And the last year has shown how our commitment to reform, followed by a decisive in-out referendum, is focusing minds and building momentum for real change across Europe. Now, reform in Europe is essential to Britain's long-term economic plan. So too is education. For the second major risk to Britain's long-term prosperity is the quality of our education. It's not just that too many of our children leave school without the necessary basic skills to achieve good careers. It's that in many of the rest of the world, they have massively upped their game in education. For the first time in 2 decades, there is now a determined effort underway in Britain to reverse the decline of educational standards and give children the quality of schooling that this modern age demands. With a massive expansion of the academy program started by Tony Blair and now extended by us to over half of all secondary schools, with new free schools, with rigor in exams, with maths, science, and engineering at the top of the agenda, and computer coding, part of our curriculum this autumn for the first time. And the businesses in this room, by the way, should get behind the Your Life campaign to increase the number of young people, especially young women, doing these vital subjects. And this September, we're abolishing altogether the cap on the number of people with the right grades who can go to university. Now, all this is a massive change for the better in the education system of our country, a change whose benefits will be felt in 10, 20, 30 years' time, as today's children find themselves better equipped to get good careers, and tomorrow's businesses find themselves better able to recruit a world-class workforce here in Britain. But these education reforms, pursued until now by parties of the right and the left, are under threat from vested interests, from the unreconstructed teaching unions, and from the political opportunism of promising students the unaffordable and the undeliverable. And the changes to schools that Michael Gove is promoting are a central part of our long-term economic plan, and if they are endangered, then so too are the long-term economic prospects of our nation. And I urge you, the business community, who so often to me have identified skills shortages as your number one concern, to get behind our education reforms and confirm how important they are to our economy. Now, the final risk that I want to talk about tonight is to the climate of opinion that supports Britain as an open, free trading, free market economy and a welcome home for business. For all of my adult life, since the fall of the Berlin Wall in the year that I left school, there has been a political consensus in this country that Britain's future lies as an open market economy. And since then, under governments of all political persuasions, we have championed free trade and welcomed foreign investment and built competitive, open markets under the supervision of robust, independent regulation. And you in this room know what a huge advantage it is for Britain that you can say that Britain is the most open, competitive economy in Europe. And that commitment to openness, independent regulation, free and competitive market exists regardless of the political makeup of the government. Now, sadly, that consensus that we put the national economic interests first ahead of opportunistic party advantage is under threat for the first time in 25 years. And political parties on the left and the populist right have this in common. They want to pull up the drawbridge, shut Britain off from the world. They want to constrain foreign investment in our economy and deprive us of the British jobs that have been created in industries from car manufacturing to energy. They want to set prices, regulate incomes, impose rent controls, wage war on big business, demonize wealth creation, renationalize industries, and pretend that they can re-establish control over all aspects of the economy. Whether from the left or the populist right, we now see a deeply pessimistic, depressing, anti-business agenda. And it takes advantage of the understandable anxieties of a population unsettled by the pace of globalization and peddles a myth that Britain can stop the world and get off. It portrays the changes to the international economy that in my lifetime have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in places like China and India, opened vast new markets for Britain as nothing more than a race to the bottom. But price and incomes controls, renationalizations, erecting the government as the enemy of business and wealth creation will lead Britain down a path of economic decline. Prices will rise as investment in areas like energy evaporates. Incomes will fall as higher taxes drives business away. Jobs will be lost as overseas companies take fright and British firms fail. And the people who will suffer will be those who always suffer when the economic policy fails, not the richest, who will find ways to protect themselves, but the poorest who suffered in the 1970s and who suffered most again in the Great Recession 6 years ago. So we ask the people of Britain, reject the forces of pessimism on the left and the populist right, reject their anti-business, anti-free market, anti-jobs agenda, which tries to play to the politics of anger, but is not the politics of the answer. Britain is on the rise again, so let the British people say to them both, you will not drag us down, and the forces of optimism will succeed. And I say to the businesses in this room, it is time for those who believe in a more optimistic future for Britain to stand up and make their voices heard. Don't just sit back and rely on others to do it for you. Make your voice heard if you believe in free markets and free trade and the free flow of investment. Make your voice heard if you believe in competitive tax rates and a climate where enterprise flourishes. Make your voice heard if you believe that Britain's future can be as great as our past, and that there's no corner of our global economy we cannot succeed in, provided we have the self-belief that this can be the best country in the world to do business, and that is the route to good jobs and better living standards and a brighter future. And that is what I believe in. That is what I am passionate about, and that is what I will fight for. We have come a long way together these past few years. The rest of the world was writing Britain off. Now they're talking Britain up. They see we've had the courage as a nation to confront our problems, how we've restored economic stability, how we're bringing our debts under control, how we're becoming the competitive place to do business. Let's finish the job so we can say to those looking for work, to the family anxious about their future, we have a plan for prosperity, a long-term economic plan for Britain, and together we are going to overcome the forces of pessimism and see it through. Thank you very much.